Hey guys, welcome back to One Stop Biology. So today we are going to cover menstrual cycle first and we'll see if we can cover one more topic of fertilization. So right now we are at the chapter 3 of class 12 NCERT Biology, which is human reproduction. And we have already covered three topics, which is male reproductive system, female reproductive system, and then gametogenesis. And gametogenesis includes both spermatogenesis and oogenesis, right? So let's see what exactly is the menstrual cycle. Now, in the last video, we discussed that there are certain cyclic events that happens in the human female, right? Now, the reproductive cycle in female primates, now be it monkeys, apes, or human beings. So that reproductive cycle is known as the menstrual cycle, right? Now, the first menstruation begins at puberty. So, remember, the first menstruation begins at puberty, and this is known as menarche. Okay. Now, in human females, menstruation is nothing but a repeated cycle at an average interval of about 28 to 29 days. Okay, so this is a cyclic event which happens every 28 to 29 days, right? Now, the cycle of events starting from one menstruation till the next one is known as menstrual cycle. So, what is menstrual cycle? This cycle of events which starts from one menstruation to the next one is the menstrual cycle. Right. Now, what happens in the menstrual cycle? So, what happens is that one ovum is released, which is ovulation, and we studied that in the last video. So, guys, if you have not gone through my last video, please check it to understand what exactly ovulation is. So, one ovum is released during the middle of each menstrual cycle, right? And the major events of menstrual cycle is we'll study through this diagram basically, right? So if you see this basically, hmm, right? So this is the diagram. Now you can see that it starts from day 1 and goes up to almost day 9, and then again the first day starts from this very same day, right? So the cycle starts from a menstrual phase, right? And the menstrual flow occurs every 3 to 5 days. So here the thing that you see, right? So you can see that it is occurring somewhere around 3 4 days, right? So they have taken an average here. So basically the cycle starts from the menstrual phase and the menstrual flow occurs and it lasts for 3 to 5 days, right? Now this menstrual flow is basically due to breakdown of the endometrial lining of uterus. So we studied the different lining or different layers of uterus wall as well, right? So it has various walls. So the innermost was endometrium. So that endometrial wall shreds basically, right? So that breakdown of endometrial lining leads to the menstrual flow, right? And the blood vessels which forms liquid, right, that comes out through the vagina. So basically that is the blood vessels which form the liquid. It sheds and the blood vessels which forms the liquid comes out through the vagina. Now menstruation occurs only if the ovum, the released ovum from the ovaries are not fertilized. So menstruation does not happen if fertilization happens and the female is pregnant. It only happens if the released ovum is not fertilized, right? So lack of menstruation may be indicative of pregnancy, right? But it might happen because of different health issues as well. Now let's move on to the menstrual phase. So the menstrual phase so this is the menstruation wala phase. This is followed by the follicular phase, which is also known as proliferatory phase. So Basically, during this phase, if you see here, so this is the developing follicle, right? So this is inside ovary. So inside ovary, the follicle is developing, right? So in this phase, basically, the primary follicle in the ovaries grow to become the mature Graafian follicle, right? Now the endometrium of the uterus regenerates through proliferation. So by this time, the endometrial wall also of uterus regenerates. Now these changes in the ovary and uterus are induced by changes of pituitary and ovarian hormone. So remember that these changes occur because of changes in level of pituitary and ovarian hormone. So there are again, in as in case of male, secretion of gonadotropins hormone, right? And those are LH, luteinizing, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormones, right? So these increases gradually during the follicular phase and stimulates follicular development as well as secretion of estrogen by the growing follicle. Right. Now, both luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone attain a peak level in the middle of the cycle, which is here, right? So basically, during the 14th day of the cycle. Now, rapid secretion of both these hormones, right? That is maximum during the mid cycle, and this is known as luteinizing hormone surge. And this induces rupture of Graafian follicle and release of ovum. So on the 14th day, the Graafian follicle, as you can see here, ruptures and it releases the ovum, and this process is known as ovulation. Now, after this follicular phase, basically this is the 14th day is the ovulatory phase, right? This at this day usually the ovulation happens. Now this is followed by the luteal phase, which is also known as secretory phase, right? So first it is menstruation phase, then it is follicular phase, when the follicle develops into a mature Graafian follicle. On the 14th day it ruptures, so it is of ovulatory phase, and then comes the secretory phase or luteal phase. Now what happens here? So basically, during the luteal phase, the remaining parts of Graafian follicle transforms into corpus luteum. It is known as corpus luteum, right? Now, the corpus luteum secretes large amount of progesterone, which is essential for maintenance of endometrium, right? So, why basically the maintenance of endometrium is important? Because implantation of the fertilized ovum happens at the endometrium, right? So that is completely nourished and maintained. So that is very important. Now, during pregnancy, all the events of menstrual cycle stop and there is no menstruation, right? In the absence of fertilization, what happens is the corpus luteum, which is formed, it degenerates. And that causes disintegration of the endometrial, which leads to menstruation, marking a new cycle. Remember, marking a new cycle, right? So this luteal phase, the endometrium develops, the Graafian follicle develops into corpus luteum, which helps the endometrium to be maintained for fertilization. But if that does not happen, this corpus luteum degenerates. And as it regenerates, the endometrial lining is again shredded, right? And that marks the next menstruation and then starts a new cycle. Now, in human beings, menstrual cycle ceases, so that stops around 50 years of age, and that is known as menopause. So, starting of the cycle during puberty is known as menarche, and stopping of this cycle at around the age of 50 is known as menopause, right? So, cyclic menstruation basically is and that too timely cyclic menstruation is an indicator of a normal reproductive phase, and that always extends between start of the cycle, which is menarche, and stop of the cycle, which is menopause. So with this, we have covered the menstrual cycle. Now, since we have more time, we'll also see how fertilization and implantation occurs, right? So basically, during coitus or copulation, semen is released from the penis of the male to vagina of the female, right? So that is copulation. Now, these sperms in the last video, we saw that they are motile, right? So these motile sperms, they start swimming rapidly and they pass through the cervix. I hope you remember the diagram of the female reproductive system. So there is a cervical canal. So they pass through the cervix and they enter into the uterus. And then they finally reach to the ampullary region of the fallopian tube, right? So the ovum is released by the ovary by that time. And that also reaches to the same ampullary region where fertilization happens. So right. So this diagram, you can see that this is an ovum and it is surrounded by few sperms, right? So the ovum is released by the ovary at the same time and fertilization takes place. Now, fertilization can only occur is if when the ovum is released during ovulation and it reaches to the same ampullary region, at the same time, the sperms are transported to the same region, or else fertilization won't happen, right? So that is the reason why not all copulations or not all coitus leads to fertilization and pregnancy. Timing is a very important factor here. Now, say if fertilization is about to happen, that means that the ovum reaches to the same ampullary region, and at the same time, we have sperm as well reaching to the same region. Then the process of fusion of sperm with an ovum happens, and this process is fertilization. Now, during fertilization, so there are various layers around ovum, right? So even in this diagram, if I have to label it, these are sperms. We know that this is a sperm, say. Now this is an ovum. Now if you see, so there are various layers. So during fertilization, sperms comes in contact to a layer known as zona pellucida layer of the ovum, right? So this layer that you see, this layer is zona pellucida layer. Okay, so the sperm basically comes in contact to the layer zona pellucida and induces various changes in the membrane. Now, these membranes also block entry of different other sperms. So, say there are different sperms. Here you can see that this sperm, right? This sperm has come in contact with zona pellucida. Now, this contact will also instigate a factor which will block these two sperms to come in contact now, right? So they will basically block an entry of these sperms now. These are additional sperms, right? So this basically ensures that only one sperm fertilizes and the ovum, because the ovum is just one, right? Now the secretions of the acrosome, and I hope you remember the diagram of the sperm as well. If not, please go and check my previous video, right? So this basically secretion of the acrosome of the sperm helps the sperm enter into the cytoplasm of the ovum through zona pellucida and the plasma membrane, right? So inside it enters inside now, right? Now this induces the completion of meiotic division of secondary oocyte, right? So the second meiotic division is also unequal, and that results in formation of second polar body and haploid ovum. Now soon the haploid nucleus of the sperm and that of the ovum fuse together and they form the zygote. They form the zygote, right? Now you can see that there are different other layers as well. So basically, these are cells of corona radiata and this is known as perivitelin space. There is a space which is perivitelin. So sperms basically they basically eject the male gamete, and oh, this they already have the female gamete. Here comes the male gamete. They fuse and they form the zygote, which is 2n, right? So now you see that the mitotic division starts as the zygote. After this, what happens is the zygote moves from there towards the uterus. So as the zygote moves through the isthmus of oviduct, which is known as cleavage, towards the uterus, the mitotic division already has started. In what? It has started in the zygote, right? So let's see how it divides basically, right? Let's see that through a diagram. So this is the diagram basically, right? So here you have the ovum. Here this sperm is entering inside, right? Now the basically the female and the male gamete forms the zygote here, right? Now this zygote has developed and basically mitotically divided into two cells, right? Then four cells, again another mitotic division, right? And then eight cells, right? And after that, 16 cells. I hope you have counted these cells. This is the 16s. These are the 16 cells. So basically, they form 2, 4, 8, 16 daughter cells, and these are known as blastomeres, right? So the embryo with 8 to 16 blastomere is known as morula. It is known as morula. Again, it is known as morula. So basically, this can be known as morula, right? Now, this morula continues to divide and that transforms into blastocyst. So, if you see inside here, this structure, you see this structure. So, this structure is of a blastocyst. So, the morula continues to develop and divide into this structure, which is blastocyst. So if I have to enlarge it and show it to you, basically this is the structure of a blastocyst, right? Now, basically this all of this is happening as the zygote is moving towards the uterus, right? It is moving into the uterus basically. Now the blastomere in the blastocyst are arranged into an outer layer. Now this outer layer is known as trophoblast. So the blastomeres, the 8 and 16 cells that arrange into an outer layer trophoblast, and inner layers are there, inner cells are there, right? These inner group of cells attached to trophoblast are known as inner cell mass. So this is the cell mass, right? Now the trophoblast layer then gets attached to the so this gets attached to the endometrium of the uterus, and the inner mass, this inner mass, cell mass, that gets differentiated as the embryo. So this basically becomes the offspring, right? So after attachment, the uterine cells, they basically start dividing rapidly and covers the blastocyst, right? And as a result of that, the blastocyst becomes embedded in the endometrium of the uterus. So what happens? It is embedded in the endometrium of the uterus. So here if you see, now this is embedded, right? And this is known as implantation. Now this implantation leads to pregnancy. Okay, so guys, with this we have covered two very important topics, menstrual cycle and pregnancy and implantation. Right, so fertilization and implantation. Now, in the next video, we are going to cover how pregnancy happens and embryonic development and parturition happens. Right, so I hope you have understood the menstrual cycle and fertilization and implantation, how the cells divide, how the zygote is formed. And if you have any doubts, please do not hesitate and let me know either in the comment section of the video or on the WhatsApp number that I have provided in the description of the video. Now, if you do understand if you did understood the complete video, please again do not hesitate in liking the video and please share it with your friends, and also do subscribe to the channel to get all the updates. Thanks guys, bye bye.